Boy. Episode 4 of this Mr. McMahon Docuseries on Netflix. It was one that, compared to episode 3, that had not too much really going on in that episode. It was kind of like it felt like a breather episode. Episode 4 was one of those ones that I felt like I had to try to watch at least twice before I did this review, because there was a lot that happened in episode 4, as it's called Attitude, because it mainly focused on the Attitude Era and what it took for WWE to overcome 83 straight weeks of losing to ECW in the TV ratings during the Monday Night Wars. And of course, again, WCW was live. WWF was pre-taped ahead of time. So that was, of course, a disadvantage there. But of course, some craziness happened with them leading to basically just going off the cuffs, like doing just whatever they wanted to, whatever it took to beat WCW. Some say they kind of took it a little too far. I hate to say it, I kind of agree a little bit, but again, it's stuff that it feels like, if you want to stand out as one of the best of must-see television, you're going to have to do some risque things. Now, of course, today, we have AEW, that's TV 14, and yes, their storytelling sucks right now, but I feel like the violence is more so where they've dug deep with, being, risque and going all out, no pun intended. Watching this episode shows, and just how much of an emphasis on, sex appeal and the awkwardness. There was just some things, especially with physical motions, I felt like they may have taken it a little bit too far. I mean, again, you can't take away the fact that it made it successful, but it's do we really have to have women flashing themselves every 10 seconds? Or, the treatment of the women, especially during the Attitude Era. Although, of course, successful, to me, it's okay, knowing, of course, where wrestling got today, and again, too, because even, Shawn Michaels mentioned, later on how, when it was coming at a cost of, it being a bad influence on kids, because one of the two dumb things Vince McMahon said in this episode was that the Attitude Era was family friendly. No, it wasn't. It was aimed towards a more mature audience, not kids. Kids who are doing the whole suck it thing and hand motion chant and whatnot, and all this other stuff. It's I can understand why some people were pissed. Of course, my thing is if you knew it was suggestive, why'd you let them watch it? Because to be honest, my son, who's supposed to be here in 4 weeks, maybe sooner, I wouldn't have let him watch the Attitude Era. I'm sorry. Kids that young should not be, knowing about the purpose of some of these things. But, in my opinion, pro wrestling and sports entertainment was never really meant to be a kid's show, as I've always said. But we're going to dive in. There's a lot more that we talk about besides the fact that, the price they paid for being risque at times. Of course, again, in the long run, it's what got them at their peak of the history of the company. But still, of course, obviously, eventually, there were some cons that was exposed. But still, the Attitude Era was definitely a much-needed era for wrestling. So, even though we kind of went back before, later on in the episode, when we talked about Stone Cold Steve Austin, episode 4 started off picking up back with the Montreal Screwjob. And following up with the heat Vince McMahon got with the whole Bret screwed Bret promo. And Vince decided to take that heat and make it into business. Which, is what you should do with a lot of things. CM Punk and the Elite. But that's not going to happen now, of course. But, so Vince talks about how Dr. Jerry Graham, I believe it was. I can't remember if he was a doctor or not. was kind of one of his idols growing up. Something also he also got to ride in the passenger seat of one of his cars. Like, he claims he wanted to be a lot like him, and that's what he was trying to base his character, and I say character, off of, is Jerry Graham. You know, the power-hungry boss that just thinks he can get away with everything, and, you know, just basically who Vince McMahon truly is. And that's, again, like I said before in the intro, there were two things. So far, there have been three things, well, I feel like more, that Vince said that was just total BS. The first one was that line he said, and I think it was episode 2, about the thing about how he claims he didn't do the things that Rita Carlson accused him of. And he said, and even if I did do it, it's beyond the statute of limitations. Which, again, that is stupid to say, especially when you believe you are innocent. In this episode, first, of course, he said later on that the Attitude Era was meant to be family friendly. And then he also said that the Vince McMahon character is nothing like Vince McMahon himself. I can't tell you one person who was interviewed that said the opposite. Everyone, Hulk Hogan, Cody Rhodes, I think Tony Atlas, a few others I can't remember off the top of my head, all of them said, oh yeah, Shane did as well, said Mr. McMahon, the character, is no different than Vince McMahon himself. Well, Mr. McMahon is Vince McMahon turned up, 100% or whatnot. Basically, it's turned up a lot more. But anyways, yeah, so he took that heat and made himself, and he even said too, he always wanted to be a performer. He used that, though, to make him probably the best villain of all time. Best heel, if you wanted to put it that way. So there's that, of course, him getting the heat, and him being the one that, once people want to pay money to see, get to beat the crap out of. Well, of course, you need to, of course, eventually find who that person would be to overcome the big villain. So, around this time also, back in 1996, the year beforehand, we all remember that Triple H was originally supposed to be the winner of the King of the Ring tournament. Unfortunately, though, he got punished due to the whole curtain call thing at the Garden with Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, Shawn Michaels, and what's it called? Triple H. Oh, how I forget about him. He's the one who got punished out of the four of them. He was supposed to win King of the Ring first. But when Triple H got punished, they instead went with Stone Cold Steve Austin. They talk about how Austin was briefly with WCW as like SS Austin. He was fired. He went to ECW, which they briefly talked about ECW as well. Had Paul Heyman there as well. And some do say also that WWE at times was trying to rip off what ECW was doing with the whole extreme style of wrestling. Of course, not just the wrestling, but the entertainment, which again, is why we got, some segments with some suggestive actions in them. But yeah, so Stone Cold Steve Austin, they talk about basically how Stone Cold Steve Austin became the biggest star of the Attitude Era, winning King of the Ring. And then, I guess earlier tonight, the person he defeated, which was Jake Snake Roberts, cut some like biblical type promo on him. So when Austin won, he cut a promo and thought of, how you see John 3:16 in a lot of football games. That's when he came up with the whole Austin 3:16, and also ended with the first time I was saying, and that's the bottom line because Stone Cold said so. Of course, we all know that Austin would go on to also, they did talk about the Bret Hart and Stone Cold Steve Austin submission match at WrestleMania 13 97. Surprised they didn't, because that Austin was, of course, made a King of the Ring, but everybody feels like that Austin truly became him in that match, because he was still a heel. And that's another thing that they emphasized in this episode, was the fact that before there were good guys and bad guys. Now it's kind of like the Attitude, especially, was like the bad and the worst. There was the villains, who were just the people who wanted to see get beat up. Then there was the bad guys, who were just badasses that you wanted to see, be the one beating people up. And that's, of course, the whole thing behind, like, Stone Cold Steve Austin's character. So we had him, of course, established. Later on in the episode, they did also talk about The Rock and how he became a star, going through the idea of, they brought him in as Rocky Maivia, son of Rocky Johnson, which they also showed Rock at like 11 years old, which was the first time when he met Vince McMahon. And also talked about, of course, how his grandfather, Peter Maivia, was the High Chief of wrestling. And probably the one who got started with the whole Samoan dynasty in wrestling. And, of course, they brought in Rocky Maivia. And even Bruce Prichard said they just shoved him down our throats. Big time. And the crowd rejected him. They rejected him. They would chant, Rocky sucks, or die, Rocky, die. And they had no choice. One of the first times, Rock was one of the first characters that they had to turn heel to get over and respected by the fans. Which is when he turned heel and joined the Nation of Domination. And Rock mentions how he did ask Vince to allow him to talk himself to explain why he joined the Nation of Domination. And I like what he said. He said it's not about, color. It's about, respect. And, he resorted to the, die, Rocky, die chanting. He says, he wants respect. And that's why he joined the Nation of Domination, basically. And, of course, in a year later, he was, like, the best heel in the company, and he was a world champion. Because Vince, of course, said that he viewed him, he didn't care, what color he was. He looked at him as green, meaning that viewed him as money. And he says, if you're going to make me money, you're going to be a champion. And that's how the rise of The Rock. But I did kind of jump around a bit with the rise of course, the two biggest stars, Austin and The Rock. Let's address how the whole idea of the Attitude Era came about. So, of course, I said, for weeks, WCW was kicking WWE's ass, the WWF's ass in the ratings and whatnot, around in like the mid-90s. And I guess one night, because I always thought the whole Austin 316 promo was the start of the Attitude Era. It actually came from, because Bruce Prichard touched on it, then Shawn Michaels came on. One night on Raw, Shawn Michaels, I guess Vince wasn't at TV tapings that night. Shawn Michaels came out wearing these bicycle shorts. And apparently he stuffed some gauze in the front of them. Which is trying to emphasize big, basically. And, obviously a lot of people found it entertaining. Of course, at first, Vince was going to fine Shawn Michaels $10,000 for doing that. And he's like, yeah, but it's still, it was funny. Yes, they were kind of like breaking the rules a little bit, but it was funny. And then, over time, it's kind of like, did anybody ever see the movie Middle School, The Worst Years of My Life? This is probably a bad example, but it was about a kid who transferred to a new school, and he made a statement of breaking every single rule, basically, there was. But he was like an anti-hero, but yes, he was still, rooted for to break these rules. That's kind of like how, again, like a Stone Cold Steve Austin and a lot of people in the Attitude Era were. They wanted to see them do, this goofy stuff that's like over the line and whatnot. So that's when, of course, they formed D-Generation X, which was kind of like another form, again, of the NWO. But it was WWE's version, and of course, it was just like a frat boy type gimmick, but doing just goofy things and whatnot that young males would do. Yes, some, again, suggestive things as well, but it was stuff that was drawing an audience, and it was making people want to watch this show instead of Nitro. Because that's probably what happened with Nitro, is Eric Biscoff was relying a lot on the guys he brought in, and they were basically the same thing their whole time in WCW, where the WWF built a bunch of new stars. During the Attitude Era, we got the Triple H's, the Shawn Michaels, the Mick Foleys, the Chris Jerichos, Austin, Rock, Undertaker, several others as well. I'm sure I'm forgetting there too. But they were all in the Attitude Era. So, doing all this, they were finally starting to, kick some butt in ratings. But of course, they needed like a little more oomph. So, for WrestleMania 14, of course, shortly before this, in January of 98, I think it was, Vince mentioned that, I feel like some of you were insulting your intelligence. Which has been true about Vince McMahon for a long time. He always, when he got older and more senile, he continued to insult our intelligence. At least Tony Khan doesn't try to insult our intelligence, but he still does some BS things at times too. But Vince McMahon was trying to toy with us through his television show. But basically, Eric Biscoff, you mentioned in interviews, he didn't take Vince saying he had something up his sleeve very seriously. Until Mike Tyson came to WWE, and he was hyped up as the special guest referee for the main event of WrestleMania 14, which was the world title match between Shawn Michaels and Stone Cold Steve Austin. That's a match where Stone Cold Steve Austin won his first world title, and of course, it was a big draw because it's Mike Tyson. Now, again, I know that Mike Tyson was only a couple years out from getting out of jail, but he still was a name-drawing image that definitely transitioned over there, not just also give a rub to Stone Cold Steve Austin, but also, remember I said earlier, you had, the big heel authority figure in Vince McMahon. Now you need a true badass that you want to see just beat the crap out of him. And that, of course, was Stone Cold Steve Austin. Hence what started one of the best feuds, probably the best feud ever in the history of this company. Stone Cold Steve Austin and Vince McMahon. Went on for quite a while, yes, but it was definitely the thing that drew in the best television. And yeah, and after that, of course, it took a bit, because they still believed they had the better show, but it took a bit, but eventually, through this, WWE eventually started beating WCW in the ratings. And of course, years later, which maybe we'll get into in episode 5, because I haven't watched it, but maybe we'll get into the invasion angle and whatnot, where Vince bought out WCW and ECW. But they were soaring high, and they're off to the races. Of course, though, again, like I said before, it kind of came to a price. It kind of, taking risks eventually has a price to it. So they brought back up Phil Mushnick, the guy who has been a journalist writing crap about Vince McMahon and WWF for the longest of times. Of course, obviously, they're trying to, expose that, hey, what they're doing, the stuff with, the women, which like I said before, even Trish, of course, mentioned it too. That at the time, women were there for eye candy. There were segments where they were basically begging them to show themselves off. Of course, you had Sable in there, who was probably, the queen of that era at the time. And of course, I think the one that Vince had, because they didn't touch on this either, but I've always found it weird, especially now knowing his accusations, which again, as I keep saying, is he guilty? He has been proven guilty. But can I believe that he could be guilty? Yes. But again, I can't say he's been guilty. But even before all this, I always found it weird that Vince wrote himself in these affair storylines with these other women. And I always thought that was weird that you have control of that and yet you're doing that. So it's like, that kind of makes you look odd. But like I said, the women at this time were not out there to wrestle. They were out there for the eye candy. And, I think that's the stuff I think definitely took too far. Like, violent matches, like with AEW does, that, is more reasonable. Women being out there, and again, it's okay to have, like, sex appeal in your character. It's okay, but it just felt like watching this, like, the constant flashing, the constant, like, I don't know, like, twerking, like, it felt like, watching this, it felt like that they were just pushing it in your face. And yes, I know that's a way to somewhat draw your show. That's not what it was all about. Again, women deserve to be treated a little more respect than just their bodies. They're all talented. That's why we had the Trish Stratuses, the Litas, the Mickey James, the Alundra Blazes, the Victorias, the Molly Hollies, the Michelle McCools, like today, the Charlotte Flair, the Becky Lynch, Bayley, Sasha Banks, Mercedes Moné, the Deonna Purrazos, the Britt Bakers, the Natalias, the Naomis, the Tiffany Strattons, even the Nia Jaxes, Io Sky, Kairi Sane, Asuka, all of them, that's why we have them all today. But, like I said, I can get why people thought that it kind of took too far at times. And the influence has got on it. And then, of course, I try to remember if I'm forgetting anything before we get to how this episode ended. But, I guess, with the whole extreme stunt stuff, it eventually got... We started, talking about the heat from the Montreal Screwjob Vince got. We kind of went back full circle with that towards the end of this episode, as they did talk about the death of Owen Hart. Now, of course, it started off with Vince claims he gave Owen a choice. Did he want to leave and go with Bret, or did he want to stay here? He said he wanted to stay there. And even Bret himself said he just wondered, he knew that Vince was going to make him pay for staying. Now, there's two things I thought of also that they could have done so. Because they emphasize how Vince just toyed with Owen because of Bret leaving. But could have also Vince been doing this because he was holding a grudge against him for giving Stone Cold Steve Austin that neck injury on that pile driver. They didn't mention that, so who knows there. But we talked about it before, because I did interview the Dark Side of the Ring. And I remember, because again, I've interviewed 2 episodes of Dark Side of the Ring. This one and the Chris Benoit one. I'm pretty sure we'll probably be talking about that a little bit in episode 5. Maybe, we'll see, because again, I haven't watched episode 5 yet. But I remember when I watched the Chris Benoit one, I felt bad for WWE and Vince McMahon. But then, of course, remember when I saw the one for the Owen Hart one, and I saw how he handled that, I really went back and thought, okay, Vince was not... there's no reason to feel bad for Vince with the Chris Benoit thing. I mean, yes, it wasn't his fault, but I felt like... to me, it was like, no wonder why Vince has to be all cautious and whatnot. Nope. It didn't have... He didn't... That wasn't the case at all. So, we all know what happened with Owen Hart. Vince basically was just embarrassing on television. They gave him this blue blazer gimmick, some klutzy superhero, and he was supposed to propel in at Over the Edge in 1999 in an Intercontinental title match against who I can't remember who it was, but he was supposed to propel in from the Raptors. Now, let's remind us again. Vince McMahon has mentioned he would not make somebody do anything unless he tried it. Shawn Michaels rappelled in at one of the WrestleManias. Vince did it himself to make sure it was safe. I can remember back at WrestleMania 36 when Rob Gronkowski was there as a special guest. There's a shot of Vince showing Rob how to do the dive off the top and into a crash pad. He did that there. Vince McMahon did not at all test the equipment or check the equipment that they used for Owen Hart to rappel in, which showed how he thought of Owen Hart. That's why, to this day, was it an accident? Yes, but it could have been avoided. Vince could have tested the equipment and made sure it was okay. Because, trust me, it's not the first time Vince has done, the cheap way with things. The hook was cheap. The vest they used was not in good condition. It's because I hear stories about the Kennel from Hell match with Al Snow and Big Boss Man. How Vince threw dogs in there, but the dogs were not trained, and they're being everything but savage dogs they were supposed to be. So there's been multiple times where Vince McMahon has done something like this, and he doesn't test it out. He doesn't get professionals. He goes the cheap way. So, and then of course there's a big controversy, and this is of course where I've lost a ton of respect for Vince before, is the fact that he continued the show after Owen's death. Which, as they mentioned in the Dark Side of the Ring documentary, it basically was, he was in JR's ear going, oh yeah, he died, by the way. In 3, 2. And Vince claims the only reason why he continued the show was because the lights were out when Owen fell. So you were okay the rest of the night with all these other wrestlers wrestling around his blood that was still spattered in the ring. You were telling people, go, 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 it's your time. Yet you didn't give them the chance to mourn. Well, the show must go on. Nobody saw it if they were seeing it. No. See, this is why a lot of people don't like Vince McMahon. Because he doesn't take accountability for anything of his mistakes. Again, so Martha Hart did sue the WWF. And they settled on a lawsuit in like 2000. WWF sued the manufacturer who gave them the equipment. When in reality, I think it looks like they sued them just to give them back the money for how they got to give to Martha Hart. When in reality, again, it could have been avoided. Vince didn't test the equipment. And even the people, of course, would have said that to him. Didn't he say something like, in one of the trials, something like, I don't like your tone or something like that? When he had nothing else to say because he knew that they were right. And again, he didn't care enough at all about Owen to stop the show. But because people didn't see it, that doesn't matter. You still heard it. You still saw Owen dead in the ring. Everybody else is back there mourning. There's people who actually did love Owen in the company. You didn't. You didn't care about Owen. If you cared about Owen, you would have tested out the equipment. You would have made sure that it was safe. Or you would have hired a professional to do it. Like, it's rocket science. It's clear as day. And again, like when Vince tries to defend himself and say, oh, why you didn't continue the show? One goes, well, I mean, nobody saw it. The show must go on. Like, no, you didn't care about everybody else. You only care about yourself, as always. Selfish and just absolutely unnecessary. And again, I don't blame Martha Hart for not wanting to acknowledge Owen in any ways. That's why I'm cool with AEW doing the Owen Hart Cup and whatnot in his memory. Because that's what it should be. Yes, Bret Hart did eventually forgive Vince McMahon. And again, that's between him and Vince. Cool. Me personally, I still think it was ridiculous and a bad move, a selfish move for Vince not to end the show that night. That is just absolutely selfish. Especially, I still will not forget in the Dark Side of the Ring documentary, whenever Vince, whatever, I think it was JR who said that, Vince basically said, oh yeah, he's dead. And back on show in 3, 2, it's like, totally disrespectful. Absolutely disrespectful. And again, as I said before, Vince McMahon just never takes any responsibility for his actions. He never admitted that, yeah, I should test the equipment. No, it's just I don't like your tone. Ego and taking things too far and like literally not caring for your talent. Stuff like that happens. And again, Vince McMahon just obviously just never learned. And again, at almost 80 years old today, he's never going to change. And it's why I am glad, knock on wood, because at this point you never know anymore. Somehow, as I always said, Vince McMahon is just that villain that always finds a way. And it makes me just want to see him get taken down. And I'm glad he is gone. And I hope it stays that way. But in some ways, it's like, if Vince McMahon, in fact, is guilty of these accusations, he deserves, like, some sort of a punishment. If he is guilty. Like, he's just someone that you just want to see get his comeuppance. And it's like he somewhat hasn't yet. Yes, him, getting, no longer with the company. But again, he made it justified so that way it looked like he was the one who made the decision, not the company. He had to make himself look like he was the bigger man. He's not the bigger man. So, that is the Attitude Era. So, and of course, it kind of set the tone for what we could be getting in the next part, which I'm feeling like in the next part they're going to address the Chris Benoit era and how WWE eventually had to transition back in, well, probably the transition from the WWF to the WWE, and then of course how they went back to PG. But that's my thoughts on episode 4, Attitude, for the Vince McMahon docuseries. What do you guys think of the episode 4? Like I said, what do you think of like some of the controversy that came from the Attitude Era? Do you think, of course, what they did was the right move to make it, of course, as well? Was it worth the risk? Leave your thoughts down in the comment section below. Be sure also, as always, to slap a like on the video and subscribe for more content on my channel. Follow me on Twitter as well at The Club of the Man 93. You can also follow me on TikTok and Instagram at The Club of the Man 1993. And again, we're 2 episodes away from completing this docuseries. I look forward to seeing what's next when we get to episode 5. So until then, guys, I'll check it out. Catch you guys all later. Have a great rest of your night. And do not forget, in order to be superior to the man, you've got to be the man. And for I am the man himself. And that is not just in pain, my friends. That is a fact of life. Yeah!